The control room allows you to use Cubase like a traditional studio with different rooms. It also allows you to set up separate headphone mixes and control your monitor speakers. By the end of this chapter, you'll be able to configure your control room, set up studios and headphone mixes, use the TalkBack and Listen bus. The control room's primary job is headphone mixes, monitors, and TalkBack. To take advantage of the control room, you'll need an interface with at least half a dozen separate inputs and outputs. Also, extremely low latency is a must because all of the monitoring functions in the control room have to run through your computer's CPU. There are two ways to enable the control room. You can open the VST Connections dialog and select the Studio tab, then click on the Power button. Or you can select the control room panel on the Mix console and click Enable. The control room panel appears empty until you configure the channels. Return to the VST Connections window Studio tab. One quick note, anytime the control room is enabled, the preview function in Media Bay goes offline. Turning off the control room will restore the preview function in Media Bay. Click the Add Channel button. You can see 5 types of channels are available. The external inputs are for playback devices like CD players. The single TalkBack channel is for the engineer's microphone. The 4 cues are the individual mixes for each performer, and the monitor channels allow you to control various speakers or monitors from within Cubase. To get a better sense of how this fits together, you can call up the control room overview and watch the connections appear on this schematic as we proceed. First, I'll create a TalkBack channel. Then I can assign an audio device and route it to a specific port. Exactly how you route this will depend on your hardware. In my case, I simply have a basic microphone in a desk stand next to my computer. If your mixing board has a built-in TalkBack mic, you'll need to route it to your audio interface to use it inside of Cubase. Next, I'll add 2 cue channels. So here's how the hardware looks at this point. Your setup will depend on your interface and your outboard gear. Now, I won't use the Add Headphone option because my interface has a built-in headphone jack. If your interface doesn't have headphone capability, you can use this to create a dedicated phones channel here and assign it to a set of output jacks. Let's add 2 monitor channels. The first one will feed the main control room speakers. The second monitor channel will be a mono channel, which I'll route to a small monophonic speaker for reference during mixdown. We also need to open the Outputs tab and disconnect the stereo output bus. Otherwise, the stereo out and the control room will fight for the use of the jacks. Now let's return to the Mix console and see this in action. Open the Racks window and enable QSense. Then expand the slot for cues. Now you can see we only have 2 cues available since we only enabled 2 QSense in the VST connections. Turn on both cues for the drums channel. Now you can control the volume and pan of the drums going to Q1 and Q2 independently. Remember that Q1 is the headphone mix for the vocal booth and Q2 is the headphone mix for the live room. So if the performer in the booth wants less drums and the performer in the live room wants more drums, we can set that up right here. But here's a faster way to bring all of your cues online. First, select all of the channels that you want to include, and this is important because the command we're about to send will only affect the selected channels. Next, right-click on the control room mixer pane and expand the All Cues section. Then enable Activate QSense. If we right-click again and select All Cues, Use Current Mix Levels, we can instantly give the current mix to all the performers. Now, I generally work this way and then fine-tune each headphone mix to what the performer needs. And I want to show you another handy trick. Right-click and reopen the All Cues menu again. Select the first option for Change QSend Levels. Now, this dialog lets you turn all of the selected QSends up or down by a fixed amount. Now, right-click one more time on the control room pane. Notice the subpanels for booth and live room. If you expand the From Selected Mixer Channels option, you can call up the Change Cue Sends level again, but here we're doing it only for that individual performer. Now here's an example of how to use this. Let's say the performer in the booth says, "Can you please turn down all the guitar tracks in my headphones?" Now you could manually go into each channel and turn down each send level on each guitar track. That would actually be simple in this case because we only have 2. But let's suppose that you had 12 guitar tracks. That's a lot of clicking and dragging. So here's an easier way. Select all the guitar tracks. Right-click on the Control Room tab. Open the From Selected Mixers channel for the booth, and then Change Cue Send Levels. This will pull down all of the guitar tracks together. And if you leave it in relative mode, the guitars will stay mixed relative to each other, just at a new, softer level. Now, when you have 4 separate headphone mixes going and each performer is asking for this group of channels up and that group of channels down, this workflow is a real time saver. Then, when you've got the take and everybody wants to hear the mix, you can simply switch their feeds from the headphone cue back to mix. Now, you also have the option to check out what each performer is hearing in their headphones right from your chair. At the bottom of the Control Room tab, you have buttons for Mix, Q1, and Q2. Now, if we had all 4 studios online, there would also be buttons for Q3 and Q4 as well. And just a note, make sure that the Cue Sends on the stereo out bus is disabled if you want to hear just what the musicians are hearing. Now, when I click on Q1, the mix going to the vocal booth plays through my main speakers. The same for Q2. The signal level is used to set your listening volume in the control room. And notice that changing this has no effect on the master level. The dim button turns the control room volume way down so that you can talk or take a phone call without adjusting anyone else's levels. And you can determine how far that's turned down using the Preferences menu. The talk button toggles the engineer's talkback mic on and off. You can assign a key command to the talkback function so that you can use it quickly. However, unlike a traditional hardware talkback, this uses a latch-style command, so you have to press the shortcut key once to turn it on and once again to turn it off. You can select different control room speakers. In this example, we only have options for A and B because we only configured 2 monitors. If we had all 4 sets of speakers enabled, there would be options from A through D. You can toggle different stereo configurations for each monitor, and the small drop-down at the end opens the Mix Convert plugin to help with down mixing. That's to move from one configuration to another. Now, since this project is set up in stereo, we can select that on the left side and mono on the right. And we'll talk more about this in the chapter on surround, but the purpose here is to help you go from lots of channels to fewer channels. The listen bus can be a real lifesaver during mixdown, but it's not addressed in too much detail in the operations manual. Listen is similar to solo because it allows you to isolate channels for analysis. But unlike solo, listen allows you to kind of zoom in on a track without touching the faders and still hear it in context. It's sort of like a soft solo. To use it, you have to enable listen on at least one track. Then, when you engage listen mode in the control room, you can use the listen level to adjust the monitor volume of all the channels in listen mode. You can choose to listen pre-fader or post-fader, and if you choose pre-fader, you'll hear that track without EQ and processing. If you choose post-fader, you'll hear it with the EQ and processing. If you're using send effects, you'll need to select listen on the effects channels as well if you want to hear them. Finally, the control room has the capacity to include insert effects for the studios, talkback, and monitors. You could use this for protection limiters for your monitor speakers or dynamics control of the talkback mic. But since all the monitoring runs through the CPU, it will throw in a lot of potential latency. So unless you're running Cubase on a Cray supercomputer, keep it simple. Don't set up 4 studios when all you need is 1 or 2. and don't load up the system with plugins on the monitor channels unless they're absolutely necessary. Okay, let's move on to the next chapter.